The rope's cruel etchings told the tale ere the body's discovery. Isaac Woodard stood amidst the nascent mist of a Georgia pine grove in the year 1866, his gaze fixed upon the raw scars etched into the bark, testament to his younger brother Samuel's desperate struggle for life as the merciless Klan hoisted him skyward. The coarse hemp had scored the branch overhead, leaving gouges as profound as dagger wounds. Beneath this grim canopy lay scattered fragments of white cloth, a torn hood, and boot prints etched into the earth, charting a course eastward toward the distant town. Samuel, but 23 years of age, freed from bondage but 18 months, devoted himself to learning the written word at the missionary school. His sole transgression, the audacity of passing a white woman without yielding the boardwalk. Isaac's hands held steady as he severed the rope that held his brother. They had trembled often enough in the shroud of darkness, bearing Samuel's cold, lifeless weight homeward through woods that whispered with the lament of nightbirds and the echoes of distant cruel laughter. But now, kneeling beside the shallow grave he had dug with his own hands, for no other soul dared risk being seen in aid, his fingers moved with a surgeon's cold precision. He interred not merely a brother, but that very part of his soul which had once dared to believe freedom synonymous with safety. The Klan chapter responsible for Samuel's demise held sway within Miller County, Georgia, a desolate expanse of clay roads and sprawling cotton fields where the promise of Reconstruction had wrought little change, save for the pervasive reign of fear. 27 souls comprised their formidable number. Their clandestine gatherings occurred each Tuesday at the witching hour of midnight within the charred shell of the Baptist church upon the town's periphery, their steeds tethered in the shadows without, whilst they plotted which freed souls required a violent reminder of their allotted station. The local sheriff, a man named Clayton Deere, kept meticulous records, not of transgressions against the law, but of grievances against the established order. Each black family that dared stray from their prescribed path, each fledgling school that opened its doors, every acre of land acquired, found its careful entry in his ledger, inscribed with the meticulousness of an accountant tracking unpaid debts. Isaac had served as a scout for the Union Army's 54th Massachusetts Infantry, honed in the art of traversing enemy territory without sound or trace. He had charted Confederate supply lines, pinpointed targets, and dissolved into the shadows before the first blush of dawn. These skills had not waned with Appomattox's peace. Now he wielded them in a campaign of a different, darker hue. The first Klansman met his end 3 weeks after Samuel's lynching. Thomas Pritchard, a miller who had openly boasted of the hanging at the general store, was discovered at the bottom of his own well, his neck grotesquely shattered. The town spoke of accident, of drink, of a fatal slip upon the moss-slicked stones. A tragedy, they murmured. Yet, a stark white hood had been nailed to his front door at the stroke of midnight, a message that required no translation. The Klan held an urgent council that Thursday. Voices rose in fervent speculation of Union agitators, of carpetbagger vengeance, of anything, indeed, save for the unthinkable prospect that one of their victims might retaliate, for such a notion lay beyond their comprehension. From Sheriff Deere's Journal, October 8, 1866, the Pritchard incident disquiets the brethren. Whispers of federal troops now circulate. Yet none surmise the true authorship. The second death arrived with greater haste. Martin Hayes, who had held the flaming torch during Samuel's lynching, ventured into the river bottoms for a hunt and was never seen again. 4 days thence, his body was discovered, his rifle untouched beside him, his throat severed with what the coroner, in grim admiration, termed military precision. Another hood, stark and chilling, appeared upon the very steps of the church where the Klan held its clandestine assemblies. Its fabric was fouled perhaps with mud or something far more sinister, and affixed with a note penned in careful script. 25 remain. Isaac had learned the grim virtue of patience in the crucible of war, enduring hours submerged in marshlands, awaiting the opportune moment to strike. Now he applied that same patience, observing the Klan's movements from the sanctuary of tree lines and rooftops, marking those who walked solitary paths, those who indulged excessively in drink, those who favored shortcuts through the shadowed, unlit alleys. He mapped their fear with the same meticulous precision he had once employed to chart enemy positions, identifying every vulnerability, calculating every trajectory of their demise. The third killing shattered a core of the chapter's brittle confidence. Robert Finch, a tobacco farmer whose laughter had been loudest as Samuel swayed from the gallows, was discovered in his barn, impaled through the chest by his own pitchfork. The weapon had been driven with such brutal force as to pin his body to the wooden wall, and his Klan robe draped across a nearby stall, arranged with grim artistry like a scarecrow, a silent sentinel over his own corpse. This time, 3 families gathered their meager belongings and fled Miller County without explanation, and the Klan's Tuesday gathering counted but 19 souls in attendance. The hunters were now learning the bitter taste of being the hunted. Yet, Isaac comprehended a truth that eluded them. Fear, he knew, was a weapon sharper than any blade, and silence could cleave deeper than the shrillest screams. Each Klansman who perished did so in silence, without witness to their final breath. Their bodies were discovered only after Isaac had dissolved back into the anonymity of the freedmen's quarter, where dozens of souls would readily attest to his presence throughout the entire night. The stark White Hoods continued their grim reappearance, warnings, tallies of the fallen, promises yet to be fulfilled. And with each apparition, the remaining Klansmen cast upon one another gazes fraught with fresh suspicion. Was it the Yankees who wrought this havoc? Was it some rival chapter settling old scores? Or could it be that the very black man they had terrorized for sport had risen to become their relentless executioner? They would learn soon enough, for Isaac Woodard's tally was far from complete, and Sheriff Clayton Deer's name lay circled in resolute ink upon a list Isaac kept folded close against his heart. A list transcribed by his brother's own hand, names Samuel had overheard and meticulously recorded before they struck him down for the audacious crime of literacy. 22 Klansmen remained, and one of them wore a badge. The scent of tanned leather and tobacco smoke permeated Clayton Deer's office on Main Street, mingling with the metallic tang of gun oil and something far more ancient, the pungent odor of secrets long kept within locked drawers. Sheriff Deer had held unchallenged dominion over Miller County for 8 long years, first as a Confederate provisional marshal, then as the architect ensuring Reconstruction remained a mere inscription on parchment rather than an unwelcome reality upon the land. His office sat directly above the county jail, its 3 sparse cells rarely housing white men, and from his vantage at the window, he commanded a view of the entire town square, meticulously noting who conversed with whom, who gathered where. Control, he had learned amidst the crucible of war, sprang from information. Fear, from unpredictability. Together, these forces maintained order. Yet, now that order was fracturing. He spread the grim reports across his desk on that November morning of 1866. 3 Klansmen dead in 6 short weeks, each demise more unsettling than the last. Pritchard's accidental fall into the well, Hayes's throat slit in the river bottoms, Finch's gruesome impalement in his barn. And those chilling hoods, appearing like silent accusations, tallying the dwindling numbers, made his hand involuntarily twitch toward the whiskey drawer. The chapter had lost 8 more brethren, fled. Families, their eyes haunted, now fled in wagons at the first light of dawn, citing business elsewhere as their hurried exodus. 11 remained. 11, plus himself, the sheriff. From the Miller County Register, November 12, 1866. Recent tragedies attributed to lawless elements within the county. Sheriff Deer assures all upright citizens that investigations are ongoing. Federal troops are deemed unnecessary. Deer had meticulously forged his Klan chapter, recruiting men who grasped that power demanded enforcement, and enforcement in turn demanded fear. In the wake of Lincoln's assassin's bullet and Johnson's perceived weakness, they had reclaimed what the war had pilfered, not lands nor wealth, but certainty. The absolute certainty that white men stood ever above and freed slaves knew their appointed place below. Samuel Woodard's lynching had been executed with textbook precision. A visible lesson, a public demonstration witnessed by a sufficient multitude to disseminate its chilling message, yet without inciting enough clamor to draw federal attention. But now, someone was rewriting that grim lesson. The 4th killing transpired the very night following Deer's public assurance in the newspaper. James Bullock, the man who had furnished the rope for Samuel's hanging, was discovered in the church cemetery at dawn, interred to his neck in freshly turned earth, suffocated by the very soil. His Klan robe lay spread across the shallow grave like a macabre blanket and carved into the nearby oak, the same tree where the chapter's fiery symbol had burned the week before Samuel died, were 4 chilling words. 10 more, after you. The calculus of revenge was shifting. 10 Klansmen now remained, excluding the sheriff. That same morning, 3 more families departed the town, leaving but 7. Isaac Woodard observed Bullock's exhumation from the shadowed blacksmith shop, peering across the cemetery fence, his hand steady upon the hammer he purportedly wielded for a wagon axle's repair. He had spent the previous night digging that grave by the pale light of the moon, meticulously calculating depths, accounting for soil density, and timing suffocation to the precise minute. The war had imbued him with the grim art of engineering, how to collapse tunnels upon Confederate supply depots, how to undermine the very supports of bridges, and these principles, he found, applied with equal efficacy to graves. Bullock had discerned his grim fate some 40 seconds before its culmination, his muffled screams absorbed by 3 feet of unforgiving Georgia clay. No soul had come to his aid. Isaac had anticipated this, for the Klan's dominion had always been predicated upon isolation, upon ensuring their victims faced terror utterly alone, without witnesses, without recourse. Now Isaac was teaching them how that felt. The remaining Klansmen ceased their gatherings at the church. The locale, they deemed, was too exposed, too predictable. Instead, they convened at various clandestine locations: a secluded barn, a remote hunting cabin, the rear room of the general store, shifting their venue with each meeting, revealing its whereabouts to no one until the final perilous moment. But Isaac, having spent 2 years infiltrating Confederate encampments, understood that men gripped by fear developed patterns, even when convinced their actions were random. Fear, he knew, rendered men utterly predictable. The fifth death stood as grim testament. William Cobb, the youngest Klansman, a youth barely 21, perished in his own home while his parents slept undisturbed in the adjacent room. They found him at the morning meal, seated at the kitchen table, his throat savagely opened, a white hood placed over his head like a macabre burial shroud. The killer had entered and exited through a window Isaac had observed Cobb leave unlatched for 3 successive nights. A small habit, a minute vulnerability. Enough. 6 Klansmen now remained. Sheriff Deere summoned an emergency meeting that afternoon, gathering the depleted ranks of survivors within his locked office. They arrived separately, striving to avoid being seen together, endeavoring to deny the pervasive fear that compelled them to check every shadow and to sleep with loaded rifles beside their beds. Deere observed their faces, pale, exhausted, flinching at every distant footfall, and realized he was witnessing a spectacle he had never beheld throughout 4 years of war. Confederate soldiers learning the bitter truth Union slaves had always known, that no place offered sanctuary, that night provided no protection, that even the powerful could become prey. Federal troops, someone ventured, their voice hushed. Why not appeal to the district commander? This is nothing short of terrorism. And what tale shall we spin for them? Deere retorted, his voice a level, dangerous murmur. That someone is slaying Klan members? They would dispatch investigators. They would begin asking questions, unearthing the membership lists. He tapped the ledger upon his desk with a pointed finger. They would discover the connections between us and every lynching, every beating, every burning of the past 2 years. We would hang from federal rope just as surely as any Negro. The room descended into a tense silence, broken only by the ragged breaths of the men and the relentless tick of the wall clock. Then what course of action remains to us? Martin Pierce inquired, his voice strained. He had been the one to light Samuel's books, the very volumes the young man had been studying, consumed by flames in the town square as a chilling warning. Now Pierce's hands trembled visibly as he rolled a cigarette he would never ignite. To hunt him down seemed the obvious answer. To unearth the perpetrator and make an example that would reinstate the old order, restoring their fractured certainty. Yet hunting demanded knowing the identity of the hunted. And none would voice the unspoken dread that permeated the room, that the killer might be one of Samuel Woodard's own people, that a freed slave might indeed possess the skill and the burning rage to execute such precise military vengeance. For to admit such a truth meant acknowledging the utter fragility of all they had built. Deere reached his decision. "We shall set a trap," he declared. "This is no random act. The killer knows us, knows our habits, knows precisely who was present the night we hanged the Woodard boy." He unrolled a map of the county, marking strategic locations. "Next Tuesday, at the stroke of midnight, we announce a meeting at the old church, publicly, loudly. Ensure the word spreads far and wide. But we shall not gather there, we shall gather here." He circled a spot 2 miles north, a tobacco barn where they would lie armed and waiting. "When our killer arrives at the church, we shall take him." It was a plan forged in cunning and patience. It would surely have succeeded had not Isaac been listening, concealed beneath the office floor vent, throughout the entire deliberation, crouched in the profound darkness of the jail cell below, its lock picked an hour before the meeting's commencement. 6 Klansmen remained, and 1 sheriff, 7 more grim lessons yet to impart. The autumn wind bore the mingled scents of curing tobacco and kerosene through the barn's planked walls, mixing with the nervous sweat of 6 armed men, crouched in the suffocating darkness. Sightlines affording vigilance over every angle of approach. The Klansmen had ensconced themselves within the loft and behind stacked crates, rifles loaded, their eyes fixed upon the single road that wound from town toward the decoy meeting site at the old church. The hour was 11:15 on Tuesday, November 20th, 1866. In a mere 15 minutes, their relentless hunter would arrive at the empty church to find nothing but the deceitful play of shadows. Then they would spring their trap. Deer checked his pocket watch by the meager glow of a shielded candle, lest its light betray their presence through the planked cracks. Martin Pierce was stationed at the north window, his hands at last steady, for he now grasped a weapon instead of succumbing to fear. The others, Davis, Monroe, Tucker, and Henderson, were dispersed throughout the barn, each covering a crucial approach. 7 men in total, 7 triggers waiting to unleash their deadly intent. What they did not comprehend was that Isaac Woodard was not approaching, he was already within. The crawl space beneath the tobacco barn's floorboards was a constricted maw, barely 2 feet of clearance, choked with decades of dried leaf chaff and the detritus of rats. Yet Isaac had squeezed into far tighter confines during the war's grim campaigns. He had entered through the exterior vent 3 hours earlier before the setting of the sun, whilst Deer was still gathering his men in town. Now he lay motionless in the profound darkness beneath their boots, listening to their labored breathing, their hushed conversations, the subtle creak of wood as they shifted their positions. Above him, through narrow gaps in the floorboards, he could discern fragmented glimpses. A boot heel, the cold barrel of a rifle, the faint edge of a lantern's glow. He had brought 4 instruments into that confined space, a knife, a coil of rope, a tin of kerosene, and the profound patience he had honed during 18 months of scouting behind enemy lines. And time he had in abundance, for while they believed they hunted him at the church, he was already hunting them here. From a recovered letter, date unknown. The cruelest facet of war is not the act of killing, but the agonizing weight that precedes it. In that limbo, men reveal their truest selves. Precisely at 11 o'clock, a horse and rider approached the old church 2 miles to the south. It was a freedman named Moses Carter, whom Isaac had compensated with $5 to don a dark coat and ride past at the prearranged hour. But the night remained in hushed stillness, and after 30 minutes of uneventful waiting, doubt, like an insidious rot, began to spread through the group's resolve. "Perhaps he will not come," Tucker whispered from the shadowed loft. "He will come," Deer replied, though his voice carried less conviction than his words. "He has proven too consistent, too methodical. He will not forego this meeting." But Isaac had never harbored intentions of attending their meeting. He was convening his own grim assembly. At 1:45, Isaac began to move through the crawl space with the absolute silence that had preserved his life through 2 years traversing Confederate territory. He navigated by memory and by touch alone, positioning himself directly beneath the spot where Martin Pierce stood sentinel at the north window. Through the narrow floorboard gaps, Isaac could discern Pierce's heavy boots, the hem of his trousers, the subtle shift of weight from left foot to right. Pierce, he recalled, was the very man who had ignited Samuel's books. Isaac had watched from the assembled crowd, compelled to stand witness like all the other freed people, ensuring they beheld what fate befell literacy, what became of aspiration, what happened to the very idea that freedom encompassed more than mere breath. Now, Pierce would learn, in chilling brevity, what it truly meant to stand upon unstable ground. The knife Isaac carried was a Bowie blade, 13 inches of carbon steel, claimed from a Confederate officer in Virginia. He pressed it upward through a narrow gap in the floorboards, slowly, incrementally, testing the resistance of the aged wood until its keen tip found the very seam between 2 planks directly beneath Pierce's left boot. Then, with calculated precision, he applied pressure, working the blade as a lever, prying open a gap wide enough for the grim task that awaited. The rope came next, threaded upward through the widened gap, its end formed into a sinister noose. Pierce never cast his gaze downward. None of them did, their attention fixed elsewhere. They scanned for threats from without, from the encompassing darkness beyond the barn, from the distant roads and tree lines where danger was expected to manifest. The very concept that death might rise from beneath them, from the foundation upon which they stood, never occurred to men who had spent their lives standing upon the crushed backs of others. At midnight, Isaac pulled. The rope snapped taut around Pierce's ankle. He had but a fleeting half-second to register confusion before Isaac yanked him violently off balance, sending him crashing through the weakened floorboards in an explosion of splintered wood and choking dust. Pierce plunged into the crawl space with a choked, strangled cry, landing hard upon his back, and Isaac was already in motion, his knife finding ribs with the chilling precision of one who had studied anatomy in field hospitals, who knew precisely where to cut to impose silence without ceremony. The others froze, caught in that critical moment of incomprehension when the human brain struggles to process impossible information. Then, chaos erupted. "He's in the floor!" someone screamed, and rifle shots tore through the floorboards, blind firing into the crawlspace, muzzle flashes strobing the sudden darkness. But Isaac had already rolled away from Pierce's body, melting along the barn's foundation toward his next chosen position. Wood chips and splinters rained down as the Klansmen fired frantically, striking nothing but earth and their own burgeoning panic. Deer sought to restore order. "Cease firing! You will strike one another! Get outside and cover the exits!" But Isaac had already reached the crucial support beam at the barn's southwest corner, the very one he had partially severed the previous night, whilst they slept soundly in their beds. He kicked it once with savage force, and the barn's roof sagged, uttering a groan of failing timber. Monroe, stationed in the precarious loft, scrambled backward as the very structure shifted ominously, and his sudden weight proved enough to complete the collapse. The entire northwest section of the roof descended in a deafening crash of shingles and beams, and Monroe was swallowed with it, crushed beneath the tobacco-scented wreckage. 5 Klansmen remained, plus Deer. "Out! Everyone out!" Deer roared, his voice hoarse. But Isaac had anticipated this turn as well. The tin of kerosene he had strategically placed near the lantern, concealed behind a crate rigged to tip upon the roof's collapse, had already spilled its volatile contents across the desiccated tobacco leaves. The open flame met the spilled fuel, and fire spread with the ravenous hunger of something long dormant, now granted permission to consume. The barn became a roaring oven. Henderson reached the door first, stumbling out into the cool night air, and Isaac rose from the crawl space through the exterior vent, emerging behind him like a specter born of smoke. Henderson was still convulsed with coughs, still striving to orient himself when the rope, already looped, already prepared, settled with sinister grace around his neck. Isaac hauled him backward into the impenetrable darkness, before Henderson could utter a scream, before the others could bear witness, and by the time Davis and Tucker burst through the fiery door, Henderson had already vanished, dragged into the tall grass where Isaac had cached supplies for this exact grim scenario. 4 Klansmen and 1 sheriff remained trapped inside the inferno of the barn. The grim mathematics of revenge were now becoming chillingly clear. Deer finally understood. Not through gradual dawning, but in a sudden, brutal flash with the stark clarity that descends when every foundational assumption collapses. This was no random violence. This was not the work of federal troops, nor rival Klansmen, nor mere lawless chaos. This was military strategy, executed by one who had learned warfare from its professionals, who had planned every contingency, who had transformed their very trap into his own relentless killing ground. This was Isaac Woodard manifest. And Deer's name had been circled on a list throughout the entire grim affair. The sheriff emerged into the night with Davis and Tucker, the 3 of them retreating from the hungry flames. Rifles raised, they scanned the encroaching darkness, which now seemed thick with unseen threats. Behind them, the barn collapsed inward with a final roar, sending sparks spiraling into the November sky like fiery accusations seeking heaven. "We need horses," Davis gasped, his voice ragged. "We need to get back to town. Get help. Get the—" His sentence ended abruptly as Tucker's head snapped violently sideways, a rope appearing around his throat from the inky darkness, yanking him off his feet and into the shadows with the brutal efficiency of a stage hook. Davis fired blindly into the darkness, achieving nothing but the betrayal of his own position. And as he turned to flee, Isaac stepped from behind a looming tree, driving the knife between his shoulders, felling him without ceremony. 2 men remained standing in the stark firelight, Sheriff Clayton Deer and Isaac Woodard, the hunter and the hunted, at last face to face, yet Deer was no longer certain which role he now embodied. The barn fire cast dancing, demonic shadows across Clayton Deer's face, illuminating features that had, for years, condemned men without trial and brazenly christened it order. Isaac stepped into the periphery of the light, some 50 feet distant, the Bowie knife still dark with Davis's fresh blood. He had removed his hat, allowing Deer to see him fully, Not as some phantom Union soldier or faceless avenger, but as Isaac Woodard, the man whose brother had died for merely walking upon a sidewalk. The very man Deere had watched from his office window the day Samuel's body was dragged through town as a grim warning. Recognition struck Deere with the force of a sudden cold deluge. "You," the sheriff breathed, his voice a ragged whisper. His rifle was raised, aimed at center mass, yet his hands had developed a debilitating tremor that caused the barrel to waver erratically. "You are but one man, one man with a brother," Isaac interrupted, his voice quiet, almost conversational, like one discussing the weather or the price of crops. "Samuel Woodard, 23 years of age. You inscribed his name in your ledger under disciplinary actions required. I found the entry, dated August 15th, 1866. Deere's finger tightened on the trigger, but an unseen force stayed his hand from firing. Perhaps it was the chilling certainty in Isaac's posture, the way he stood utterly still despite the rifle aimed directly at his chest, as if bullets were merely theoretical concerns. Or perhaps it was the grim mathematics of the night. 7 Klansmen dead or missing in the past 90 minutes, executed with the cold precision of one for whom killing had become routine. "You cannot prove a thing," Deere declared, falling back upon his hollow authority like a drowning man clutching at driftwood. "I am a lawful sheriff. You are a murderer. Even if you kill me, there are federal troops, marshals, courts that would not let my brother testify," Isaac replied, his voice unyielding. "Marshals who looked away while you burned his books. Federal troops who departed last month because Johnson recalled them." He took one deliberate step forward. "You constructed a system where we possessed no recourse, no protection, no voice. Now you lament that I do not employ your legal channels." The barn fire crackled behind them, sending embers spiraling skyward like desperate prayers. Deere made his desperate decision and fired. The shot went wide, not from any flicker of mercy, but from hands that had utterly forgotten steadiness under duress. Isaac moved before the echo of the shot had died, closing the distance with the lethal speed that had preserved his life through 18 months in Confederate territory. He slapped the rifle barrel aside as Deere fumbled to work the bolt, and the two men collided in a desperate tangle of violence that had nothing to do with technique and everything to do with raw, unbridled desperation. They went down hard, rolling through the ash and trampled grass, exchanging blows that carried the crushing weight of competing certainties. Deere fought with the last vestiges of strength, defending a world order he believed absolute. Isaac fought with the unholy fury of one who had already lost everything that world could take. The knife had fallen during the savage tackle, and now it became a desperate race, both men scrambling toward the glinting blade while striving to pin the other. Deere reached it first. He drove the bowie blade upward toward Isaac's ribs, but Isaac caught the wrist, redirecting the thrust past his side, then brought his elbow down upon Deere's forearm with enough savage force to make bone creak ominously. The knife tumbled free once more, and Isaac's fist found Deere's jaw once, twice, thrice, until the sheriff's resistance became a mere reflex rather than an intentional act. Isaac retrieved the knife and pressed it against Deere's throat, hard enough to draw a thin line of crimson, but not deep enough to finish the grim task. Both men breathed heavily, their faces mere inches apart, close enough to perceive the other's humanity and to choose whether such a sight mattered. "My brother begged," Isaac said quietly, his voice a chilling whisper. "While you watched, while 26 of your brothers in white held torches aloft and cheered. He begged for his life, and you laughed." Deere attempted to speak, but the blade pressed harder against his throat. "Do not," Isaac continued, his voice cold and unwavering. "Do not tell me he should have known his place. Do not tell me it was necessary. Do not insult me with hollow justifications." He shifted his weight, pinning Deere utterly. "You are going to die tonight. The only question is how you will spend your final minutes, begging, as Samuel did, or accepting what is to come." The sheriff's eyes darted toward the distant winding road, toward the town, toward a rescue that would not arrive. Then something shifted in his expression, not acceptance precisely, but a profound, exhausted resignation. "You will not stop with me," Deere rasped. "There are others, other chapters, other towns. You kill me and you become precisely what we claimed you were. Proof that freed slaves are dangerous, that Reconstruction is destined to fail." Isaac's laugh was a sharp, humorless bark. "Do you truly believe I care what tale you spin once you are dead?" Do you imagine I am concerned with your pitiful propaganda? He leaned closer, his eyes burning. I am not making a statement. I am settling accounts. Yet, Isaac comprehended a truth that Deer did not. Every death had been strategic, not emotional. Every killing had imparted a message to the living as much as it had punished the dead. The hoods placed on doors, the public discoveries of bodies, the escalating fear. This was no random violence. This was psychological warfare, meticulously designed to shatter the Klan's illusion of invincibility. And Clayton Deer's death, Isaac knew, needed to be public. Isaac hauled the sheriff to his feet, keeping the knife pressed firmly against his throat. Walk, he commanded, directing Deer toward the road that led back to town. Behind them, the tobacco barn collapsed entirely, a roaring funeral pyre for the men who had built their power upon fear, and discovered too late that fear cuts both ways. They walked for 20 minutes in a silence broken only by the crunch of gravel under their boots and Deer's ragged, labored breathing. The sheriff attempted to speak several times, offering deals, uttering threats, even attempting reason, but Isaac remained silent, his focus absolute upon the grim destination he had chosen weeks ago when conceiving this endgame. The old Baptist church appeared ahead, the very edifice where the Klan had held their meetings, where they had gathered to celebrate Samuel's lynching. It sat dark and abandoned, yet Isaac had prepared it with meticulous care. Inside, he had arranged 7 stark white hoods in a semicircle around the altar, each stained with the ash of the tobacco barn. In the center, visible through the gaping door, a noose hung from the ceiling beam, the very rope they had used on Samuel, which Isaac had cut down and meticulously preserved for this exact purpose. Deer saw it and comprehended fully. No, he whispered, a desperate plea. Please, I have a family, children. They do not, Isaac replied, his voice chilling. Samuel had a family too, me. He forced Deer up the church steps, through the door, into the cavernous space where evil had once audaciously called itself righteous. The hoods watched like a silent jury, and the noose waited like an unyielding verdict. Isaac had performed the calculations, the precise drop, the knot placement, the intricate physics of a clean break versus slow strangulation. He had become an expert in death's grim mechanics, learning its precise grammar through relentless repetition. But something made him pause, not mercy precisely, nor forgiveness, but a stark recognition that to kill Deer here, in this manner, would transform him into precisely what the Klan claimed him to be, a monster, an animal, something less than human. And Samuel, who had died for learning to read, who had believed education would prove their inherent humanity to people who stubbornly refused to see it, deserved better than a revenge that confirmed every lie they had ever spun about him. Isaac lowered the knife, his hand slowly relaxing its grip. I should kill you, he said finally, his voice ragged. God knows you have earned it. But Samuel believed in something better than us, than both of us. He stepped back, releasing Deer from his grasp. So here is what shall happen instead. He gestured toward the hoods arranged in their sinister semicircle around the altar. You are going to gather what remains of your chapter, the ones who ran, the ones hiding, every last one of them, and you are going to tell them that the Klan is finished in Miller County. No more meetings, no more lynchings, no more terror. Isaac's voice hardened, becoming a cold, sharp edge. Because if I hear otherwise, if I learn of one burned school, one beaten freedman, one cross ignited, I will return, and next time I shall not stop at 7. Deer stared at him, his mind struggling to process this utterly unexpected pivot. You are letting me go, Deer stammered. I am giving you a choice, Isaac corrected, his gaze unwavering. Live with the searing knowledge that a freed slave spared your life after you took my brother's. Tell your children that story. See if they believe you were right. The crushing weight of it, living as a walking reminder of utter powerlessness, of a mercy he himself had never shown, of a moral debt he could never hope to repay, settled across Deer's shoulders like a cold, immovable stone. Sometimes, indeed, survival is the heavier sentence. But Isaac had made one critical miscalculation, and Clayton Deer perceived it immediately. The sheriff was a man who had forged his entire identity upon never appearing weak, never backing down, never allowing the people he had oppressed to witness his humiliation. And humiliation, for men like Deer, was a wound that demanded, with fervent desperation, to be reopened and avenged. The very moment Isaac turned to depart, Deer seized the fallen rifle from the church corner where it had been propped and fired. The gunshot echoed through the sacred space of the church like a congregation's final resounding amen, and Isaac Woodard dropped. He struck the floorboards hard, blood blossoming from his left shoulder where the bullet had caught him mid-turn. The Bowie knife skittered across the worn wood, spinning to a halt against the altar steps. For 3 agonizing seconds, neither man moved. Deer still gripped the smoking rifle. Isaac lay sprawled and bleeding, both minds reeling, processing the sudden, brutal reversal that had transformed an act of mercy into a fatal mistake. Then Isaac's right hand moved with desperate intent toward his belt, toward the revolver he had taken from Henderson hours earlier, and Deer fired again. The second shot went wide, tearing through the church wall behind Isaac's head, and by the time Deer worked the bolt for a third round, Isaac had rolled behind the front pew, using the heavy oak as desperate cover. Blood left a widening trail across the floor like a crimson accusation, and Isaac's left arm hung useless, the shoulder wound deep enough to steal both strength and coordination. He pressed himself against the unforgiving wood, breathing through gritted teeth, frantically recalculating odds that had shifted dramatically in the past 10 desperate seconds. "You should have killed me," Deer called out, his voice now steady, invigorated by the advantage he held. "That was your fatal mistake, believing mercy held any meaning for men such as I." Isaac remained silent, conserving his dwindling energy, assessing his desperate options. The revolver rested in his right hand, loaded with 4 precious rounds. Deer held a rifle, possessing superior range and at least 3 more cartridges. The church offered limited sanctuary, the pews, the altar, perhaps the distant door if he could but reach it. Yet movement would betray his position, and his left side was utterly compromised. Blood loss would inevitably weaken him within minutes. The grim mathematics had turned irrevocably hostile. "Here is what happens now," Deer continued, moving laterally, seeking a better angle upon Isaac's concealed position. "I finish what should have been done properly long ago. Then I shall ride back to town and tell them the truth, that the murderer who killed my men attacked me in this church, that I defended myself, that justice was served." His boots creaked ominously on the aged floorboards. "Your dead body will tell the story I need it to tell." Isaac's vision blurred for a fleeting instant, then snapped into sharp focus. The shoulder wound was grievous, but not immediately fatal. If only he could staunch the flow of blood. He used his right hand to tear a strip from his shirt, awkwardly wedging it against the entry wound while keeping the revolver poised and ready. The pain was sharp enough to cleave through coherent thought, yet he had learned during the war to partition suffering, to acknowledge its presence, then to set it aside like a tool not currently required. "Samuel believed in better," Isaac said, his voice carrying clearly despite the gnawing pain. "You proved him wrong in 30 seconds. Your brother was a fool," Deer replied, and now genuine contempt, no longer disguised by fear or cunning strategy, laced his voice. Thinking that reading would render him equal, that freedom signified anything more than mere breathing. He fired through the pew, the bullet splintering wood mere inches from Isaac's head. "We tolerated you people as property, as freed labor. Now you are merely competition, and competition gets eliminated." The brutal honesty was almost refreshing. No pretense of law or order, no hollow claims of Christian duty, just the naked acknowledgement that the Klan existed solely to preserve hierarchy through unbridled violence. Isaac had always suspected this underlying truth beneath the bombastic rhetoric. Now, it was stated plainly, unequivocally, in a church where they had once offered prayers before committing lynchings. He needed to move. To remain pinned meant to bleed out slowly or to take a bullet that found its mark. But Deer had positioned himself with tactical acumen, covering both the door and the aisle, rendering any desperate dash for escape a gamble Isaac could ill afford, with one arm compromised. So he changed the very rules of the game. "Your ledger?" Isaac called out, his voice sharp and clear. "The one in your office. I made copies. I sent them to the district marshal in Atlanta, the Freedmen's Bureau in Savannah, and 3 northern newspapers." It was partially true. He had copied key pages, entrusting them to Moses Carter's keeping, but had not yet mailed them, a form of insurance, awaiting the opportune moment. "You kill me, and those documents still exist. Every name, every disciplinary action, every Klansman in Miller County identified for federal prosecution." Deer's footsteps halted abruptly. "You are lying," he said, but a tremor of uncertainty had crept into his voice. "The Henderson family lynching, April 2nd, 1865. Isaac recited from memory. "The Williams barn burning, June 15th, 1865. The Cooper shooting, January 9th, 1866. He paused, letting the names hang in the air. 27 incidents documented in your own handwriting, Clayton, complete with dates, locations, and participants. Do you truly believe the Union Army will not be interested? The bluff was precisely calculated. Deere knew his ledger existed. He knew it contained damning evidence. But he could not be certain whether Isaac had actually accessed and copied it. And that gnawing uncertainty, that possibility of public exposure, even in a moment of personal victory, was enough to make him hesitate. Isaac seized upon that hesitation. He rolled left, away from his grim blood trail, coming up behind a different pew with the revolver raised. Deere spun toward the sudden movement and fired, but the shot went high, anticipating where Isaac had been rather than where he had now moved. Isaac returned fire twice, not aiming for center mass, a difficult feat with one compromised arm, but for Deere's legs, aiming to disable rather than to kill. The first shot missed its mark. The second caught Deere in the right thigh, and the sheriff went down hard, his rifle clattering across the wooden floorboards. Both men were wounded now, both bleeding, the air within the church filling with gun smoke and the coppery tang of shared mortality. Isaac stood, swaying slightly, his left arm a useless dead weight. Deere clutched his wounded leg, his fingertips straining toward the fallen rifle, yet falling inches short of its grasp. They stared at each other across 12 feet of stark separation. Two men who had wielded both mercy and violence in equal measure, both now learning that neither was simple, neither without profound cost. "You were right," Isaac said finally, his voice raw. "I should have killed you." Samuel's way, believing in something better, got him hanged. He raised the revolver, sighting down the cold barrel at Deere's chest. "So here is the lesson I learned tonight. Mercy is a luxury freed slaves cannot afford." His finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, the church door burst open, and Moses Carter stood silhouetted against the encroaching night, a shotgun braced against his shoulder. "Don't," Moses said quietly, the weapon aimed steadily at Isaac. "Not Deere, not like this." Isaac froze, confusion cleaving through the haze of pain. Moses was meant to be long gone, paid and sent north, beyond the reach of danger. But here he stood, intervening, protecting the very man who had terrorized them both for years untold. "Move," Isaac commanded, his voice tight. "This does not concern you." "It concerns all of us," Moses replied, his voice firm. He was 73 years old, a freed slave who had survived 4 decades of bondage and 2 bitter years of Reconstruction's false promises. "You kill him execution style, wounded in a church. That is not justice. That is merely us becoming them." He held the shotgun steady, his resolve unwavering. Samuel would not desire this. You know he would not. The crushing weight of his words settled upon Isaac like inescapable chains. Isaac stood poised between 2 stark futures, one where he completed what he had begun, where revenge was absolute, satisfying, and ultimately hollow. The other where he permitted Deere to live, knowing the sheriff would spend every remaining day plotting how to restore the very hierarchy Isaac had so violently shattered. Both choices felt like a profound, unyielding defeat. But Moses was right about one undeniable truth. Samuel had died believing education and dignity would prove their humanity. And Isaac, covered in blood and clutching a gun in a church filled with the ghostly white hoods of vengeance, was demonstrating the stark opposite. That freedom, for them, required becoming monsters. That survival meant surrendering the very principles Samuel had died defending. The revolver lowered incrementally, a slow, heavy descent. "Get him out of here," Isaac said to Moses, his voice strained. "Get him to a doctor and ensure he remembers this day. Next time I will not hesitate." Moses nodded, a silent acknowledgement, and helped Deere toward the door. The sheriff limped badly, leaving his own crimson trail beside Isaac's upon the floor. At the threshold, Deere turned back, his face a chilling mixture of pain and cold, calculating resolve. "This is not over," he said, his voice a promise. "I know," Isaac replied, the words a weary echo. And that was the moment they both heard it. Horses approaching, multiple riders moving with speed and purpose, drawn by the gunshots or the burning barn, or perhaps by someone in town who had at last grown suspicious. The ominous sound of authority, arriving too late to prevent the grim culmination of events, yet early enough to assign blame. Isaac and Deere locked eyes one final time, a silent understanding passing between them. One of them would tell the story, one of them would shape what had transpired here tonight into the defining narrative of Miller County's future. and whoever wielded that power would determine whether the Klan's reign of terror ended or merely evolved into something new. The horses drew closer, their hoofbeats growing louder, splitting the very fabric of the night into a clear before and after. And Isaac Woodard made a choice that would irrevocably define everything that followed. He dropped the revolver, kicked it toward Deer, and pressed both hands, one functional, one useless, against his bleeding shoulder. When the riders burst through the church door moments later, they found Sheriff Clayton Deer holding a weapon, Isaac unarmed and gravely wounded, and Moses Carter standing poised between them, a shotgun pointed at no one in particular. The tableau presented a stark, undeniable story. The question remained, which one? Deputy Marshal Henry Calhoun dismounted first, followed by 6 mounted men, a motley mixture of concerned citizens and opportunistic vigilantes, drawn by rumors of violence at the old church. Calhoun was a federal appointee, 32 years of age, who had served with the Union cavalry and understood the treacherous politics of Reconstruction better than most. He absorbed the scene with the practiced eye of one accustomed to violence masquerading as order. 2 wounded men, gun smoke lingering like a pall, white Klan hoods arranged like grim evidence around the altar. "Will someone explain this chaos?" Calhoun asked, his hand resting deliberately upon his sidearm. Deer spoke first, as Isaac knew he inevitably would. "This man attacked me, Isaac Woodard. He is responsible for killing 7 men in this county over the past 2 months. I tracked him here, attempted to arrest him, and he opened fire." The sheriff's voice carried an undeniable authority, despite the pain of his leg wound. "Carter there can confirm it." All eyes turned to Moses, who stood with the shotgun now lowered, his weathered face a mask, utterly unreadable. Here was the fulcrum, the agonizing moment where truth and survival intersected, where one old man's words would determine whether Isaac lived to witness a new dawn or died at the end of a rope that bore no relation to justice. Moses met Isaac's gaze briefly, a fleeting connection, then turned to Calhoun. "That is not how it happened," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years. The church seemed to hold its breath. "My path had led me near when the sharp reports of gunfire pierced the air. Upon entering, I found Sheriff Deer standing over Isaac, who was already wounded and unarmed. Deer was on the verge of delivering the ultimate injustice." Moses gestured toward the shrouds. "This edifice, the very sanctuary, serves as the Klan's clandestine meeting place. Yonder lie their ceremonial robes. Isaac had ventured here seeking proof of those responsible for his brother's lynching in August." Deer sought to quell his voice. It was a perilous wager, to gainsay a white sheriff before white witnesses, risking everything on the slender possibility that a federal marshal might administer justice without prejudice. But Moses had lived 73 years, watching circumspect men perish just as surely as the bold. And sometimes survival dictated the choice of perils. Deer's countenance burned crimson. "A fabrication. This Negro shields a killer." "Then explain the hoods," Calhoun interjected, his steps carrying him toward the altar. He lifted one, scrutinizing the telltale ash stains, the meticulous folds. "Account for the 7 suspicious demises that have plagued this county, each victim rumored to have frequented the Klan's assemblies." He pivoted to confront Deer. "Unfurl the secrets of your ledger." The silence that followed was profound. "Weeks prior, a hidden safeguard, and weeks prior, a hidden safeguard, and conveyed them to Marshal Calhoun's office in Atlanta. Not out of faith in federal justice, but from an astute comprehension that power demanded written record, that accusations necessitated substantiation, and that newly freed souls could not afford the luxury of fighting with honor unaccompanied." "I am unacquainted with the subject of your discourse," Deer stammered, his voice bereft of its former assurance. Calhoun withdrew a folded parchment from within his coat. 27 recorded instances of racial brutality, he announced. Participants meticulously named, dates specified, locales marked, methods detailed. He commenced reading from the page. August 15, 1866. Disciplinary action decreed for Samuel Woodard. Flagrant insubordination. Learning to read. Chapters unanimous decree. Public correction. The marshal's tone remained devoid of inflection, weighted with the gravitas of prosecution. "That is your own hand, Sheriff. We have had it authenticated." The other men in the room stirred uneasily. Some, staunch adherents of the Klan, bristled at this federal intrusion. Others, who had long harbored suspicions though never confirmed the grim truths woven into the fabric of Miller County's purported law enforcement, found their unspoken fears given voice. Those men launched the initial assault, Deere attempted to assert. Every documented act was but self-preservation, maintaining order. Self-preservation against a man merely striving to learn to read? Calhoun interjected sharply. An order maintained through the conflagration of schools and the brutal lynching of freedmen. He motioned to his deputies. Relieve him of his weapon. He stands apprehended for conspiracy to commit murder. But this was Georgia, in the year of our Lord 1866, a realm where federal writ was more theoretical construct than practical enforcement. Here, 6 armed local men, erstwhile companions of Deere, found themselves abruptly compelled to choose between the dictates of a northern marshal and the allegiance owed their sheriff. The very calculus of allegiance swayed like shifting sands. 3 riders gravitated toward Calhoun. The other 3 aligned themselves with Deere. The sanctity of the church threatened to yield to the chaos of a battlefield. Isaac, his lifeblood still staining the pew, observed the weighty calculation unfold across each man's countenance. This was the precise moment toward which the true war had inexorably progressed. Not merely the formal conflict concluded at Appomattox, but the deeper struggle concerning the very meaning of Reconstruction. Whether federal statutes would genuinely safeguard freedmen or merely grant them theoretical recognition while forsaking them in grim reality. Stand down, Calhoun commanded, yet his own hand was already seeking his weapon, acutely aware that directives held sway only when backed by resolute enforcement. What granted a momentary reprieve to all was the distant thrum of approaching hooves. A multitude, a thunder suggesting not lone riders, but an organized militaristic column. Union cavalry, a formidable contingent of 24, materialized in the church doorway, flanking Calhoun. Their lieutenant, a young man named Morrison, rendered a sharp salute. Marshal Calhoun, we received your dispatch regarding potential opposition to federal authority, reporting as requested. The tide of fortune once again dramatically turned. Deere's adherents watched their slim chances vanish like mist. One might contend with a lone marshal, placing a precarious wager on local sympathies. But to oppose the might of the United States Army would be to declare outright rebellion. The 3 men who had supported the sheriff slowly, incrementally, lowered their arms, and the crisis dissipated, yielding to the more accustomed tableau of reluctant submission. They led Deere away in shackles, his leg oozing crimson through bandages hastily bound, his face a chilling tableau of rage and cold calculation. As he was drawn past Isaac, the sheriff inclined his head, near enough to murmur, "This struggle is far from concluded. Federal troops shall not linger eternally, and with their departure, so too shall their protection recede." It was both an oath and an ominous foretelling. Isaac recognized the stark truth in Deere's words. The Union cavalry, inevitably, would retreat. They were bound to withdraw, unable to perpetually occupy the southern lands. And upon their withdrawal, whatever shield Isaac had gained this night would dissipate like the morning mists. Yet Moses had purchased precious time for him, and time, Isaac had come to understand, constituted the most invaluable armament in any conflict. Calhoun drew near to Isaac, motioning for a medic. "Your testimony will be required concerning your brother, the Klan's illicit dealings, and all you have observed." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "I cannot vouch for your safety, even with Deere incarcerated. His adherents will surely seek reprisal. You would be wise to consider relocating northward whilst we pursue this prosecution." "Flee, then?" Isaac uttered, the words more a statement than a query. "Survive," Calhoun amended. "There exists a crucial distinction." Was there indeed? Isaac had devoted 8 weeks to tracking those who had taken Samuel's life, executing them with a chilling precision that would have garnered admiration from his Union commanders. 7 now lay dead, 1 captured, and the Klan's suffocating hold on Miller County was, at least for a time, fractured. Yet the immutable calculus of power remained unaltered. For each Klansman he had slain, a dozen more lurked in adjacent counties. For every sheriff apprehended, another would ascend, one who would learn the prudence of avoiding written ledgers. The medic diligently tended Isaac's shoulder, deftly extracting the bullet and binding the wound. A keen and instant pain, it cleaved through the adrenaline-induced haze that had, until then, buoyed his senses. Around him, federal soldiers secured the consecrated space, meticulously documenting the hoods, meticulously recording statements, performing the solemn bureaucratic rites that transmuted raw violence into tangible evidence. Moses stood a short distance away, now silent, his testimony having been rendered. his gaze fixed upon Isaac with an expression that might have been solicitude, or judgment, or merely profound weariness. "You should have apprised me of your delivery of those pages," Isaac murmured softly. "You would have restrained me," Moses countered. "Claimed it too perilous, my son, that I was too aged to imperil myself." He offered a slight shrug. "At times, old men prove useful precisely because the weight of our years renders us indifferent to peril." "My gratitude." "Reserve your thanks. You breathe, but you are not truly free." "Not really." Moses indicated the cavalry with a slight movement. "They will exploit you now, exhibit you, compel your testimony. Transform you into a symbol. The freedman who resisted, the hero who defied the Klan." His voice held no trace of admiration. "Symbols, you see, invite death upon all who surround them." It was a grim prognostication Isaac could not yet fully grasp, but whose terrible truth he would soon enough comprehend. Even to this day, the venerable inhabitants of Miller County assert that faint bloodstains yet mar the church floorboards, Isaac's and Deer's intermingled, forever inseparable, an indelible testament to the night when justice and vengeance blurred into one. The Atlanta courthouse exhaled the mingled scents of wood polish and aged tobacco, a fragrance interwoven with the January chill that permeated walls erected long before the mind could conceive of freedmen bearing witness within their confines. Isaac Woodard occupied the witness chair on the morning of January 14, 1867, his left shoulder still stiffened by the bullet's passage, confronting a gallery teeming with onlookers who had journeyed from 3 states to observe what the papers heralded as the Reconstruction test case. Sheriff Clayton Deer sat at the defense table, his leg mended but marked by a persistent limp, flanked by 2 Charleston attorneys renowned for their mastery in dissolving federal indictments. The prosecutor, a Massachusetts jurist named Abernathy, had meticulously constructed his case upon the pillars of Deer's ledger and Isaac's testimony, documentation and eyewitness accounts converging to substantiate a conspiracy to commit racially motivated murder. The path should have been clear. 27 documented atrocities, a dozen witnesses prepared to speak, palpable physical evidence, including the very Klan robes discovered within the church's sacred space. Yet this was Georgia, and straightforward was a concept that had never truly pertained to justice when it dared to traverse the chasm of color. Judge Harlan Whitfield presided, a local appointee who had once championed the Confederacy as a military prosecutor and now discharged his duties for Reconstruction with palpable reluctance. He had permitted the trial to commence, yet had already decreed Deer's ledger, as private property seized without warrant, inadmissible as evidence. That singular pronouncement had eviscerated Abernathy's meticulously built case, transforming a documented conspiracy into a mere tangle of conflicting testimonies, readily dismissed by judges and juries as the untrustworthy assertions of Negroes. "Mr. Woodard," Abernathy began, standing before the witness chair, "please recount for this court the events that befell your brother Samuel on August 15, 1866. Isaac had meticulously rehearsed this moment for weeks, honing the narrative until it flowed with a seamlessness designed to withstand any interruption. Samuel was returning home from the missionary school, where he pursued the forbidden art of reading. He passed Margaret Finch upon the boardwalk outside the general store. He neither touched nor addressed her, simply walked onward. That fateful evening, men cloaked in white vestments descended upon our cabin, forcibly removed him, and hanged him from a pine tree standing sentinel north of the town. Did you identify any of these men?" "Indeed, Sheriff Deer was among their number. I recognized his voice as he issued commands, and later I saw his horse, marked by its distinctive white blaze upon its forehead, tethered outside the church, the very place where the Klan convened." Deer's lead attorney, a man named Crenshaw, rose instantly. "Objection! The witness is engaging in conjecture regarding my client's culpability based solely upon an equine creature that might belong to any man." "Sustained," Whitfield pronounced without a moment's hesitation. And so the grim theater unfolded for 3 weary hours. Isaac offering his solemn testimony, Crenshaw raising his vigorous objections, Whitfield consistently sustaining them. Every thread of evidence that sought to bind Deer to the Klan was deemed either circumstantial, conjectural, or wholly inadmissible. The gallery observed this methodical judicial dismantling, their faces reflecting a spectrum of emotions, from smug satisfaction to profound despair, contingent upon their allegiance within the fraught landscape of Reconstruction. During cross-examination, Crenshaw, like a predator, lunged for the jugular. Mr. Woodard, is it not true that you served as a Union scout during the recent war? Yes. And that you received training in infiltration, reconnaissance, and— Crenshaw paused, letting the word hang heavy. Assassination of Confederate targets? Isaac perceived the snare, yet found no path of evasion. I was trained to gather intelligence and, when exigency demanded, to neutralize threats. Eliminate threats, Crenshaw echoed, pivoting to address the jury. A most polite circumlocution for murder, would you not agree? And after the war, you persisted in eliminating what you deemed threats, did you not? 7 men met their end in Miller County between September and November of 1866, all discovered under the pall of suspicious circumstances, all linked to purported Klan activities. Objection! Abernathy interjected. Mr. Woodard is not the defendant in this proceeding. But his credibility is indeed on trial, Crenshaw retorted. If he is a trained assassin with ample motivation to harm these men, then his testimony against my client becomes inherently suspect. Overruled, Whitfield declared. The witness shall respond. Isaac held Crenshaw's gaze. I killed no one. This was technically accurate. He had not slain all 7, but 6. Moses had intervened before he could conclude his retribution upon Deer. Yet the lie weighed more heavily than the truth might have, forging a chasm between Isaac and the hallowed memory of Samuel, a rift that had not existed until that moment. You truly expect this court to credit, Crenshaw pressed on, that 7 Klan members perished by mere happenstance in the very county of your residence, whilst you, a highly trained military assassin, retained your innocence? The question permeated the courtroom's air, thick as smoke. What Isaac could not utter, what the very legal construct disallowed, was the truth. That those men had perished because the law itself had failed. That Sheriff Deer's badge had rendered him immune until Isaac, in his righteous fury, had reached out to him nonetheless. That the very system now demanding Isaac prove Deer's culpability had, in its profound negligence, forged the conditions where extrajudicial killings became the sole recourse for justice. I expect this court, Isaac stated, his voice slow and deliberate, to focus solely on whether Sheriff Deer conspired to lynch my brother. All else is mere diversion. But diversion, indeed, was the strategy. By the time Crenshaw concluded his cross-examination, the trial had transmuted from an indictment of Deer into an inquest upon Isaac Woodard's wartime service. The jury, 12 white men who had never ventured beyond Georgia's borders, regarded Isaac with a suspicion wholly divorced from truth, yet inextricably bound to the fear that freedmen might have absorbed too profound a wisdom from their Union training. During the midday recess, Moses sought out Isaac in the corridor beyond the courtroom. They mean to acquit him, the old man declared without ceremony. The judge has already rendered his decree. This entire trial is but a staged performance. Then why bear witness? Isaac asked, a profound weariness seeping through his words. Why subject myself to this ordeal? Because sometimes one crafts records for the tribunals of tomorrow, not merely those of today, Moses rejoined. Your testimony is now inscribed. It cannot be expunged. When Reconstruction finally takes root, if it takes root, this transcript shall stand as incontrovertible proof. That solitary if encapsulated the entirety of Moses's lingering doubt and amplified Isaac's burgeoning certainty that federal protection was but a transient illusion, whilst vengeance was an enduring reality. The afternoon session saw Moses Carter take the stand, where he recounted discovering Isaac wounded within the church, Deer standing menacingly over him with a weapon. Crenshaw rent into his testimony with thinly veiled contempt, insinuating that Moses was too aged for clarity of memory, too devoted to Isaac for truthful testimony, and too steeped in his race to comprehend legal proceedings. Judge Whitfield permitted this assault to unfold. By the third day, when Abernathy concluded his presentation, the outcome was already sealed. Crenshaw did not even deign to summon witnesses. There was no need. He merely contended that the prosecution had utterly failed to establish conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt, that all proffered evidence was circumstantial, and that Sheriff Deer himself was the true aggrieved party, assailed by a vindictive freedman. The jury deliberated for a scant 47 minutes, returning a verdict of not guilty on all counts. The gallery erupted half in jubilant celebration, half in bitter despair. Deer rose, gripped his attorney's hands, and then pivoted to confront Isaac, his expression a chilling blend of triumph and veiled menace. The message was stark. Federal courts had attempted and failed to hold him to account. Now, local power would reassert its dominion, and dire consequences awaited those who dared to challenge it. Outside the courthouse, reporters besieged Isaac, querying his sentiments regarding the verdict, inquiring into his plans for further action, and pressing him on his belief in the possibility of justice within Georgia's unforgiving landscape. He offered them nothing. No pronouncements, no declarations, no reactions that could be warped into evidence for future indictments. Marshal Calhoun drew him aside as the crowd began to scatter. "I am truly sorry. We knew this was a possibility, but you hoped," Isaac finished for him. "Hoped the system would finally function this time." "There will be appeals," Calhoun asserted. "Federal oversight, more troops if the necessity arises." "Will there be?" Isaac queried, his voice laced with skepticism. "Or will Washington deem Reconstruction too costly, too arduous, too unpopular with Northern constituents weary of concerns for Southern justice?" Calhoun offered no reply, and his silence was answer enough. That night, Isaac stood by his hotel window observing Atlanta's gas lamps flicker like captive stars against the encroaching darkness. Moses occupied the room's solitary chair, silent for once, allowing Isaac to absorb the inevitable truth they had both long foreseen. "Samuel believed education would deliver us," Isaac finally uttered. "That if we demonstrated our intelligence, our industry, our inherent worth, they would embrace us as equals." He touched his shoulder, where the bullet's scar remained an enduring testament. "I proved I could slay them with the same brutal efficiency as any white soldier, and still, they are not sufficiently terrified to treat us with equity." "Fear is not akin to respect," Moses countered. "No, but it proves a more dependable currency." The unspoken question hung between them. What new chapter now awaited? Isaac had unveiled the Klan's dark machinations, secured Deer's apprehension, borne witness in a federal tribunal, executed every act the system deemed proper, yet had achieved naught save transforming himself into a marked man. Deer walked free. The Klan, though temporarily fractured, was already mending its sinister ranks, and Isaac's very existence hung by the precarious thread of nearby federal troops. When those troops inevitably departed, the grim mathematics of power would once more irrevocably shift. Some whisper that Isaac Woodard lingered in Atlanta for 3 more weeks, awaiting the potential emergence of appeals, before at last conceding that justice had been enacted without truly being served. A mere semblance of law, devoid of its essence, a trial that altered nothing save the precarious claim to moral authority. The southbound train rattled through the cold grip of February, conveying Isaac Woodard back toward the very place where all had begun, and yet nothing had truly transformed. He had departed Atlanta on February 9, 1867, having received word that Moses Carter lay dying, not from the sharp cruelties of violence, but from the slow, inexorable attrition of a body that had endured 73 years of bondage and ceaseless toil, now finally yielding. The telegram had been terse. "Come soon. He asks for you." Though unsigned, Isaac recognized the familiar hand. Ruth, Moses's daughter, who had acquired her letters in the clandestine school Samuel had attended before the Klan deemed literacy a grave peril. Miller County presented a changed visage in the winter light. The cotton fields lay fallow, the pine trees stood stark against a somber gray sky. The town square held a quietude more profound than Isaac recalled. Yet this quiet felt less like peace and more like a tactical pause, akin to breath held taut before an impending violence. The federal cavalry, which had garrisoned the county subsequent to Deer's arrest, had withdrawn 3 weeks prior, summoned northward as Washington had concluded that Reconstruction demanded fewer soldiers and greater diplomacy. Their departure had forged a vacuum, one that men of Clayton Deer's ilk instinctively knew how to exploit. The sheriff had reclaimed his office, not through official decree. Federal authorities still contested his reinstatement, but by functional reality. He wore the insignia of authority, inhabited the precinct, and enforced an order that shielded some while it systematically terrorized others. The acquittal had rendered him beyond reach, a truth known to all. The Klan had resumed their clandestine gatherings, though now masquerading as civic organizations, and their brutal acts were euphemistically termed community defense. Isaac strode through the town, making his way toward Moses's humble cabin, acutely aware of the eyes that followed his passage from the shadows of storefronts and the vantage of porches. Some glances bore recognition, others curiosity, and a few outright animosity. He was now a figure of notoriety, the freedman who had pursued Klansmen, who had borne witness in federal court, who had compelled men of power to concede that black lives might hold enough consequence to warrant investigation into their deaths. Such renown rendered him either a hero or a marked man, contingent upon one's perspective. Moses's cabin perched at the fringe of the freedmen's quarter, a structure that listed faintly eastward, as though even the very timbers were weary. Ruth greeted Isaac at the threshold, her countenance bearing the weary peace of one who had already spoken her farewells and now merely awaited nature's final decree. "He is roused," she murmured softly. "He has inquired after you since yesterday." Within, the cabin carried the mingled sense of wood smoke and that singular staleness accompanying the fading of life, not precisely unpleasant, merely definitive. Moses lay upon a cot beside the hearth, his form diminished to stark angles and shadows, drawing breath in measured increments, yet his eyes shone with clarity when they met Isaac's, and he offered a smile imbued with what appeared to be profound relief. "I feared you might not come," Moses whispered, his voice fragile as parchment. "I imagined Atlanta might have swayed you to remain in the north." Isaac drew a chair near. "You saved my life twice over. The least I can do is be present as you relinquish yours." "Ever too practical for sentiment, were you not?" Moses responded, yet a current of deep affection underscored his words. He shifted his meager frame slightly, wincing. "I must impart something to you about what is to come. Concerning deer, you should seek repose. I shall rest soon enough." Moses's hand sought Isaac's, his grip surprisingly firm. "Deer schemes. I heard it from Ruth, who overheard it from the housemaid who attends his office. He orchestrates what he terms a correction, a concerted strike against prominent freedmen across 3 counties, all who bore witness, all who championed federal intervention, all who exposed his vulnerability during the trial." Isaac's name would assuredly grace that list. The time? Soon, ere the spring planting, whilst people remain concentrated in towns rather than scattered across the fields. Moses coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "He has learned from your actions. He will not expose himself by acting in solitude. This time, dozens will move in concert, too many targets for any single man to shield." It was a grimly strategic mind at work, recognizing that Isaac's prior success stemmed from his isolation of individual clansmen, dispatched when their vulnerability was manifest. Gently. "You slew 6 of them, secured 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 6 of them gently. You slew 6 of them, secured one's arrest, laid bare their vile machinations, struck fear into their hearts, a feat surpassing what most freedmen ever achieve. He tightened his grip on Isaac's hand. But you cannot carve a path to safety with bloodshed. Their numbers are legion, and the system itself stands as their bulwark. You have made your statement, now endure. Through the window, Isaac's gaze fell upon the pine grove where Samuel had met his end. The same venerable trees, the very same grove, likely the identical branch. 5 months had elapsed since he had cut his brother's body down, and in that passage of time, Isaac had transmuted into something Samuel would have recognized, yet perhaps could not have truly comprehended: a slayer, an avenger, a man who had embraced violence in lieu of the education Samuel had perished believing in. What if flight merely instructs them that they can terrorize us into abandoning our homes? Isaac challenged. What if true survival demands raising the cost of their oppression to an unbearable height? And what if, Moses responded, such a high cost also strips you of the very essence Samuel desired you to become? The profound question settled between them, a tangible third presence in the room. Moses departed 3 hours hence, his breath simply ceasing between one moment and the next, his hand still clasping Isaac's. Ruth wept softly, whilst Isaac remained motionless, bearing the crushing weight of another loss, another soul departed who had striven to shield him. Of land too stony for cultivation, of land too stony for cultivation, bequeathed by a white landowner whose generosity extended more readily to unworkable property than to fundamental human dignity. 20 souls attended, a number that would have swelled had not fear held others at bay. The service was brief, officiated by a circuit minister who understood that prolonged ceremony would only invite unwanted scrutiny. As the coffin descended, Isaac discerned Clayton Deer observing from the roadside astride his horse, imbued with the casual assurance of one who knew the law would not challenge his presence, wheresoever he chose to appear. Their gazes locked across 100 yards of chilled earth. Deer doffed his hat, a gesture imbued with a menace more profound than any explicit threat, then rode away. That night, Isaac sat within Moses's cabin with Ruth and 3 others from the freedmen's quarter, contemplating options, each of which felt like but a variation on the theme of defeat. They could remain and contend, which portended death. They could report Deer's nefarious schemes to federal authorities, who had already demonstrated their incapacity or reluctance to intervene. Or they could flee, which meant forsaking their homes and surrendering territory to the reign of terror. Moses spoke truly, Ruth declared at last. You cannot prevail against them through slaughter. Their numbers are too vast and their dominion too absolute. She gazed at Isaac with an expression hovering between sympathy and accusation. What you accomplished, hunting them, instilling fear, it felt like justice. But a justice that vanishes the moment federal troops depart is no true justice. It is merely an intermission. The stark truth of it settled upon him, cold as hoarfrost. Isaac departed Miller County on February 14, 1867, bearing a meager satchel and the sobering realization that sometimes survival dictated the acceptance of the unchangeable. He had proven that freedmen could indeed resist, could pursue their tormentors with the very same merciless efficiency with which they themselves had been hunted. Yet individual valor could not dismantle systemic power, and vengeance, however deeply satisfying, could not erect the future Samuel had so ardently envisioned. Aboard the northbound train, Isaac penned a letter he never dispatched, addressed to his departed brother. You were right, he wrote, that education held power. I was right that fear was a necessary tool. But neither of us comprehended that power and fear, when devoid of true protection, merely render one a target. I depart Georgia, yet I do not surrender. I am merely learning that some battles demand more than a single lifetime to wage. The Klan's correction unfolded 2 weeks following Isaac's departure. 8 freedmen were slain across Miller County in synchronized assaults. Their cabins consumed by flame, their families scattered to the winds, their names added to the grim ledger of those who had dared to stand and learn the terrible price. Federal authorities investigated, meticulously filed their reports, and achieved precisely nothing. Clayton Deer served as sheriff for 11 more years. But even today, the venerable families of Miller County whisper of the winter of 1866, a time when white hoods began to appear upon doors as chilling warnings rather than their former guise, when Klansmen discovered the unsettling sensation of being the hunted, when a single freedman reminded all that the powerful retain their dominion only so long as the powerless acquiesce to that arrangement. Chicago, in March of 1867, greeted Isaac Woodard with the pungent odors of stockyards and coal smoke. He carried Moses's watch, a tangible memento, and memories that refused to recede into the past where they might rightfully belong. The city teemed with newly freed slaves and immigrants, all pursuing the elusive promise that northern industrial wages might somehow transmute into a semblance of true freedom. Isaac secured employment at a meatpacking plant on the south side. Brutal, grueling labor that yielded enough to afford a room in a boarding house where no one inquired about scars, nor the deeds that had etched them upon a man. He now bore a different name, Samuel Carter, a fusion of his brother's forename and Moses's surname. He sought to construct the kind of ordinary existence that men like Clayton Deer had rendered unattainable in Georgia. But such an ordinary life demanded forgetting, a feat Isaac could not achieve. At night, his dreams were haunted by pine groves and white hoods, by Deer's countenance illuminated by firelight, by the pivotal moment he had lowered his weapon instead of unleashing its fury. That choice tormented him more profoundly than the 6 men he had slain. Not that he precisely regretted mercy, but rather because mercy had achieved nothing save preserving his life to bear witness to the profound insignificance of one man's courage against the entrenched might of institutionalized terror. From the Chicago Defender, March 19, 1913. Isaac Woodard, aged 76, passed peacefully in his South Side abode. A veteran of the Civil War and early Reconstruction, Mr. Woodard dedicated 46 years to Chicago's industrial sector. He is survived by no immediate kin, yet shall be remembered by the community he quietly served. The obituary made no mention of Miller County. It made no mention of Samuel or Moses, nor of that stark winter when Isaac had pursued the Klan with a soldier's chilling precision. It did not disclose that he had spent 46 years living beneath an assumed name. For to return to Georgia, even after the passage of decades, would have felt akin to beckoning the past to complete its unfinished work. But here is what the obituary, in its polite brevity, also failed to convey. Isaac never ceased his lessons. In that humble Chicago boarding house, and later in the small dwelling he acquired in 1900, Isaac presided over a different kind of school. Not one of reading and writing, for such instruction was readily available in Chicago, but one imparting something far more arduous. He instructed young black men, those who had fled northward, in the discernment of violent patterns, in the meticulous documentation of evidence, in the art of safeguarding themselves and their communities when the very forces of law enforcement proved unwilling. He imparted the very lessons Moses had striven to instill in him, that survival demanded both valor and cunning, that vengeance, though emotionally gratifying, was secondary to genuine protection, that isolated acts of violence could never supplant the enduring strength of collective organization. Some of his students advanced to establish Chicago's inaugural black self-defense organizations. Others became jurists, wielding the very system Isaac had come to regard with suspicion. A select few returned south during the civil rights movement, applying Isaac's tactical acumen to the lunch counter sit-ins and the freedom rides, a non-violent resistance that drew upon military discipline without ever embracing military methods. Isaac never learned if Samuel would have sanctioned such methods. The brother he had laid to rest held the conviction that education alone could deliver them, that demonstrating their humanity through literacy and diligent labor would in time sway white America to grant them full citizenship. Isaac, however, had come to understand that this was insufficient. That power deferred more readily to force than to virtue. That rights were conceded only when their granting became less burdensome than their denial. But he had also absorbed the truth of Moses's counsel, that one could not carve a path to justice through slaughter, nor terrorize one's way to equality. The Klan had employed such tactics for decades, and all they had constructed was a system demanding ceaseless violence for its preservation. Isaac had demonstrated that freedmen could meet that violence in kind, could pursue their hunters, could instill fear in their oppressors. Yet the mirroring of violence merely begot cycles that ground all participants into dust, until none recalled the genesis of the conflict, only the imperative to perpetuate it. The true victory, modest and unfinished though it was, emerged from the students Isaac mentored, who absorbed both crucial lessons. That power must be confronted, yet such confrontation demanded strategy transcending mere revenge. That defiance against terror was indispensable, but such defiance must build towards something greater than simple retribution. In 1893, a young barrister called upon Isaac's Chicago home, bearing documents from Georgia. Clayton Deer had passed 2 months prior, the lawyer elucidated, and amongst his estate papers they had unearthed Isaac's true name, listed as an outstanding debtor, a fabricated claim undoubtedly intended to harass Isaac even from beyond the grave. The lawyer wished to contest it, believing it could be challenged in a court of law. Isaac declined. "Let him utter his final word," Isaac stated. I harbor no interest in warring with phantoms, but that night, alone within his humble dwelling, Isaac permitted himself a singular moment of profound satisfaction. He had outlived Deer by 26 years and more. He had forged a life, unassuming yet substantive, that the sheriff's reign of terror could not expunge. He had taught dozens of young souls that survival did not necessitate a grim choice between dignity and safety, that sometimes the most potent act of resistance was simply the refusal to be erased. Samuel had been correct. Education was indeed power. Isaac had been correct. Fear was a necessary implement. And Moses had been correct. Neither could prevail in isolation. That true metamorphosis demanded generation after generation learning from the errors of their predecessors, building upon each other's valor, resolutely refusing to permit individual defeats to calcify into permanent subjugation. The work persisted long after Isaac's demise. Some of his students marched alongside Martin Luther King Jr. Others defended black neighborhoods amidst the Chicago riots of 1968. A select few became the barristers and activists who ultimately, through legal and systematic means, dismantled the very structures that men like Deer had painstakingly erected to uphold white supremacy through terror. It spanned a century. And still, the work remains unfinished. But on February nights in Chicago, when the wind bears its frigid breath southward from the lake, the elders in Isaac's old neighborhood still recount tales of the man who had pursued the Klan in Georgia, who had learned that vengeance, though necessary, proved ultimately insufficient, who had taught that sometimes the most profound act of courage a person could manifest was to endure long enough to instruct the next generation in the art of fighting with greater wisdom than he himself possessed. They say Isaac kept a white hood in his closet until the day of his passing, not as a trophy, but as a stark reminder that power forged upon fear was inherently fragile, that the oppressed, if not vigilant, could themselves become oppressors. That the true objective was not to merely invert hierarchies, but to utterly dismantle them, a task demanding a patience that might be mistaken for cowardice and a strategy that might be perceived as surrender, yet was, in truth, the most arduous form of courage. And late into the night, they say, if one stands in the Freedmen's Cemetery outside Miller County, where Samuel and Moses rest, one can still discern the wind sighing through the pines, a sound almost like singing, ancient hymns of freedom, their meaning transmuted across generations. All of them true, yet none of them entirely whole. The Klan, in due course, receded in Miller County, not because Isaac had slain 6 of its members, nor because Deer had been apprehended, but because federal law at last assimilated the profound truth Isaac had demonstrated. That terror holds sway only when its intended victims resign themselves to its inevitability. Proven is a current that flows in two proven, is a current that flows in two directions. And power constructed solely upon fear must, in time, inevitably collapse under its own oppressive weight. Isaac Woodard's enduring legacy was not the men he brought low. It was the students he mentored, who learned to wage battle without transforming into the very evil they opposed. The collective will of all, and it the collective will of all, and it continues to do so. We are but scratching the surface of this truth. The next narrative delves into even deeper shadows. Secure your access ere it is unveiled.